Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing where we left off in Tafsir Surah Al Nisa, and we are in Ayah 162. So, with Ayah 162, last time we actually said a couple things. We mentioned in لكن الراسخون في العلم منهم والمؤمنون يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك والمقيمين الصلاة. And we discussed and went in details when what actually had allowed those that found the ilm and not necessarily embrace what others had embraced is really seeking the ilm. In other words, what was really meant by that and where it was holding on to the revelation. So we went in details and we said that Al-Qurtubi had mentioned some of the examples for those that were considered at least راسخون في العلم منهم. We said Abdullah ibn Salam وكعب الأحبار. Now here's one thing. It is important to mention that كعب الأحبار is not a Sahabi but a Tabi'i. So Abdullah ibn Salam is a Sahabi, he is a companion, but Ka'b al-Ahbar was a Tabi'i and not a Sahabi. So what's the difference between a Sahabi and a Tabi'i? A Sahabi is a companion, it's a Prophet's companion in where he lived long enough to become Muslim during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, see the Prophet ﷺ, in person. كعب الأحبار التابعي التابعي is a person that saw the Sahaba, is a person that saw the Sahaba and not the Prophet ﷺ. All right, so this is the difference in where saw the Sahabi versus saw the Prophet ﷺ. Just wanted to note that piece of it. Ka'b al-Ahbar, of course, he actually died 30, well, he was born 32-year Hijriya, but he was actually, he actually died 72-year Hijriya, so not too old, really. Am I putting in the right dates here? So at the end, and where we could see that he was born 32-year Hijriya, in other words, he did not get to see the Prophet ﷺ. Just wanted to note that one. The other thing in where he was actually known to having information about the prophets, and certainly about the books and the revelations that the Yahud actually had. He was born from the Jewish tribes that lived in Yemen. So today they're actually called Mizrahi. All right, so we don't want to go in details in that, in information about that particular ayah, because we did actually mention some of the details last time. Today, inshallah, we're going to be continuing. إِنَّا أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ كَمَا أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى نُوحٍ وَالنَّبِيِّينَ مِن بَعْدِهِ. I want you to look at this right there. So we're going into the following page. Inna awhayna ilayk. So right there, of course, even though the ayah was saying لكن الراسخون في العلم منهم, as for those that are deep in the knowledge from them, that is from Ahlul Kitab and the believers, they would believe in what was revealed onto you and revealed onto those before you. So this is speaking about what really defines and how do we understand what it means to have faith in Allah and faith in the prophets in particular. So therefore, to be a believer in the previous prophets is not enough to get the person out of kufr, but in order to be a believer, they would have to believe in what was unzila ilayk, in what was revealed onto you, O Prophet of Allah, that is, O Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَمَا أُنزِلَ مِن قَبْلِكَ, and what was revealed onto the prophets before you, the prophets before you, whether we're speaking about the other prophets in certain ambiguity, in where, well, the prophets before the Prophet ﷺ, where there are certain hadith that mention that there were 124,000 Sahabi, prophet, and of course, we only have 25 different prophets that were mentioned in the Quran. وَالْمُقِيمِينَ الصَّلَاةِ, and those that would perform salah and those that would give zakah. So, and we talked about the details why speaking about مُقِيمِينَ الصَّلَاةِ, or in another qira'ah مُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةِ وَالْمُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةِ, simply because of course, it's not enough to have the ilm, but it's an issue of implementing the ilm, whether it is within, of course, the foundations of ilm, the foundations of, in particular, is-salah, or even is-zakah, which actually would mean that it is emphasizing the main pillar, the main start, let's say the main cornerstone in the relationship between the person, whether that person was a alim or whether that person was a random person. At the end, iqamat as-salah is a key, is a corner, is actually a relationship that one cannot dismiss. وَالْمُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةِ, and those that would give zakah, simply because when you would let it go and you would learn how to let go of money, how to let go of dunya, you start considering the more important, or a more important consideration, a more important value that you are investing for. And وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ, so why did it say الْمُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ first? So this, because يُؤْمِنُونَ بِمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ, so here that would mean it's emphasizing that believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and judgment day, they're interconnected, they're interrelated, and they actually go together. أولئك سنؤتيهم أجرا عظيم. Those are the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give magnificent reward. So when we say magnificent reward, it came here in the nakira state to mean that it did not go into detail. So not سنؤتيهم الأجر العظيم, but سنؤتيهم أجرا عظيما. The word ajran azima, when it is ambiguous, it would be indicating that it is not limited. But when you say al-ajr al-azim, it would be considered right there, and where it would be giving you al-istighraq, it's giving you there, it's a magnificent reward. And of course, with here saying sanutihim ajran azima, not indicating a certain limit. Inna awhayna ilayk, we had revealed upon you. So here we go. What is that related to? Because it was here mentioning bima unzila ilayka wa ma unzila min qablik. So now it's time to give details on, well, what is considered as revealed onto you and revealed onto those before you. Inna awhayna ilayka kama awhayna ila Nuh wan nabiyina min ba'dihi. We had the word wahi. The word wahi can mean and have several meanings. When we speak about il-wahi can mean a fast word, can mean a signal, can also mean a revelation, so can give different meanings. But because the word wahi can basically mean, one, we've got different types of wahi, in where you had الرؤيا الصادقة, in where you had basically the true dreams, and two, you also had the revelation il-wahi through Jibreel alayhi salam, and you also had il-wahi, the general term, in where it's an inspiration. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, would say that there was wahi sent to Musa, or there is wahi that is given to أوحى ربك إلى النحل. So this is more of an inspiration, this is more of an inner direction that is different for the prophets. Okay, so for the prophet, it's a particular, it's not the same as some kind of an inspiration, some kind of natural direction, let's say, as in the bees and how they're capable of designing, I guess, in their bees or in their honey combs or whatever it is, and what they're doing, and what inspiration and what kind of an instinct, let's say it that way, who directed their instinct or who's directing things in nature. It's basically from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving such direction. So, but of course, because this term can be general, but even though it is really particular here, كما أوحينا إليك. So now, كما أوحينا إلى نوح, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically connecting all the different prophets, in where الراسخ في العلم, the person that is deep in their knowledge, and of course here minhum, so in other words, those that were deep in the knowledge, and those that were studying the different words of revelation. Of course, here the scriptures that they had, they would recognize that all prophets are interrelated, and therefore their interconnection, their connection and deep connection is basically coming from the same, look at this one, torch, coming from the same torch, coming from the same source, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, inna awhayna ilayk, we had revealed upon you as we had revealed upon Nuh, the different prophets after you. And we had, look at this and right there, awhayna, and here ba'dihi, this ha right there, pronoun ha is referring to, who is referring to, always remember the pronoun would basically be referring to the nearest madhkur, to the nearest mentioned noun. So here, وَالنَّبِيِّينَ مِن بَعْدِهِ is referring to the nearest prophet or to the nearest name right there. So this pronoun ha. Min ba'dihi meaning Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. So when Nabiyina min ba'dihi, that the Prophet was revealed to in the same manner as it was revealed unto Prophet Nuh and the prophets that came after him, that is Nuh alayhi salam. وَأَوْحَيْنَا إلى إبراهيم وإسماعيل وإسحاق ويعقوب والأسباط وعيسى. Of course, when you look at wal asbati wa Isa, up till here, it was actually mentioned in a chronology, in order, in a chronological manner. Let's see, awhayna, and we had revealed unto Prophet Abraham, Ismail, Ishmael, Ishaq, Isaac, Yaqub, Jacob, al asbat, basically the children of Israel, the 12 children of it, 12 tribes, and Isa. Well, Isa is Jesus, peace be upon him. And then it jumps into mentioning different prophets that were not necessarily in chronological order. We'll talk about it in just a bit. Wa Ayyub wa Yunus. Ayyub is prophet. Ayyub, Jobs in English. Yunus, Genoa. Harun, Aaron. Sulaiman is Prophet Sulaiman, Solomon. آتينا داود زبورا, and had given Dawood the Psalms, is Zabur. Now, I want you to look at a couple things here in where, when you look at Isa, up until here, it did actually mention it in a chronological manner. But then Sulaiman and Dawood, even though it's father and son, and also from the children of Israel, it would be basically, if we were to put it in chronology, it would go after Yaqub, or actually after Al-Asbat. It would go after Al-Asbat. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just keep in mind that the letter wa can be as a general addition and not necessarily in a particular order. So just keep that in mind. In where, well, why were their names? Is this all the prophets that were mentioned in the Quran? The answer is no. This is not all the prophets that were mentioned in the Quran. In Surah Al-An'am or Al-Ma'idah, I believe Al-An'am, I can't remember if it's Surah Al-An'am or Al-Ma'idah, ayah 18, it actually contained all the prophets' names that were mentioned in the Quran. I'm just going to run really quick right there and actually see if I have it in Surah Al-Ma'idah or Surah Al-An'am. So in ayah 18, let's see, ayah 18. So no, it's not Surah Al-Ma'idah, then it's going to be in Surah Al-An'am. Okay, so in Surah Al-An'am, ayah 18. Let's go back to that one. Oh, I'm actually wrong. Yeah, I'm wrong in that one. I'll have to find it again for us to just remember those names. All right. Now let's look at see al-Qurtubi and what he had mentioned. So inna awhayna ilayk, and he said al-Qurtubi says inna awhayna ilayk is basically right there. He said وهذا متصل بقوله يسألك أهل الكتاب أن تنزل عليهم كتابا من السماء. So al-Qurtubi wanted and said that this ayah is actually connected not to يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك, but he connected it with يسألك أهل الكتاب. Said that is considered as an ayah that is connected with يسألك أهل الكتاب, which is right there. So they right there al-Qurtubi said because the ayah, of course, we're ayah 163, is it 163? So yes, 163, and al-Qurtubi is saying that it is connected with ayah 153. يسألك أهل الكتاب أن تنزل عليهم كتابا من السماء. And the reason why he related it with that ayah is that they would ask you, that is, the people of the book would ask you to reveal a book, basically a book that they could see coming down from the heavens. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded, so semicolon right there, they had asked Moses, even something bigger than that. And they asked to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in public or directly. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was right there responding, well, the same exact way that different prophets had a revelation. Why is it something that is considered as unprecedented or something that is rather strange? So that's why he said فأعلم الله تعالى أن أمر محمد كأمر من تقدمه من الأنبياء. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let them know that the matter of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is similar and exactly like the prophets that had come before, which basically were all the prophets that we had mentioned in this ayah right there. And of course, when you look at il-wahi, so here, waha ilayhi bil-kalam means to actually give them certain words of revelation, and certainly there's a general meaning in where to give a general signal, but certainly right there in where I want you to look at this one. Why Prophet Nuh alayhi salam was mentioned as the one to be first, and it's important to mention that some scholars like al-Qurtubi here wanted to say that these prophets were mentioned because they had a certain legislature. So that they had a certain legislature, in other words, right there in where connected with why the mention of these prophets, basically because they had certain legislatures that were revealed upon those prophets, and of course their nabiyyin, meaning that they themselves actually had a revelation that contained sharia, that contained legislature, that contained laws directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why all of these prophets in particular were mentioned. Of course, we don't have much details about Prophet Ayub or even Prophet Yunus in regards to what kind of sharia was carried, what was being practiced, etc. We don't really have any information in that regards. But it is important to connect this ayah with the ayah. So just remember page 113 right there. Let's go to Surah Al-Shura. Thought it would be important to go to Surah Al-Shura. I remember preparing, I think it was 439. Let's see if this is it. No, it's not. Hold on. We're going to find Surah Al-Shura really quick because there is oh, subhanallah, right there. We just got it right on the spot. All right. So I want you to look at this, and we're in Surah Al-Shura, of course, فاطر السماوات والأرض جعل لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا ومن الأنعام أزواجا. So here the creator of the heavens and the earth created from you, of course, your own selves, your own creation, a certain duality, the law of duality, the law of binary, azwaja. And from also, of course, the law of binary was also something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created in al-an'am, in different animals and different al-an'am is supposed to be the herbivore animals that we eat, in particular the camels, the sheep, the cows. That's supposed to be, and also the goats. But al-an'am here, of course, we're bringing in that the law of binary within nature, where he had created you in it, and basically within nature, in order to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not included within the law of binary, because the Lord Almighty, there's nothing like unto the Lord Almighty, even though negated certain descriptions, but also affirmed وهو السميع البصير, and he's the all-seeing or all-hearing and all-seeing. And to understand the nature of the Lord Almighty, له مقاليد السماوات والأرض, he is the one that has basically the forces, the power to control the heavens and the earth, and to understand how far and how extensive the powers are. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes in detail. So right there, colon, يَبْسُطُ الرِّزْقَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ وَيَقْدِرُ. He would be the one to give the different provisions, and certainly with a certain amount, for he is all-knowing in the matters of everything. Now connecting with this ayah, in where if he has basically determined the laws that how things function, from even in the law of binary, even in their own nature, they don't have the power to dictate their own creation, and certainly not the creation of the heavens on earth, and not even the forces that would continue their existence, then therefore the Lord Almighty, let's connect it right there, شرع لكم من الدين ما وصى به نوحا والذي أوحينا إليك. So you could see that this ayah is really similar in at least the vibe of it with the ayah that we were doing just a minute ago. شرع لكم من الدين, for the Lord Almighty had the word شرع actually means to legislate. So he had legislated to you, or from the religion, the word religion meaning the practice, meaning the how things are applied. ما وصى به نوحا, what was willed or decreed upon Nuh. I want to look at this one, because when you look at that decree, we're speaking about a decree, meaning an order, meaning a legislature is actually considered a wasaya. It's considered a decree, it's considered a will, it's considered a matter that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically giving that special direction, where number one, it was given to Prophet Nuh. It was also inspired or revealed onto you as well. And it was also revealed onto Prophet Ibrahim, Musa, and Isa. Let's see, what were they supposed to be doing? أن أقيموا الدين ولا تتفرقوا فيه. That they would basically apply the religion to mean what was, number one, mina dini ma wasa. In other words, to apply the religion that was inspired onto them. وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ doesn't necessarily mean to go and dispute with one another about it, but it basically means not to go and oppose it. Not to oppose the revelation, not to bring about a different interpretation, to make things, bringing in a different narrative, to create a new interpretation that is opposing what the actual scripture is saying. Now, كبر على المشركين ما تدعوهم إليه. Certainly, the disbelievers are basically going to dislike such a thing. Why? Because they want a certain culture. They want to have a certain application of their own ideologies. The second that you would come opposing, of course, their interests which would, of course, be what the culture is trying to preserve, certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically indicate right there that al-mushrikeen are definitely going to be opposing the legislature, opposing the ideology itself, opposing the aqidah, the creed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allahu yajtabi ilayhi may yasha wa yahdi ilayhi may yunib. For the Lord Almighty chooses whom He wills, that is as a prophet, and guides who, and look at the word, may yunib, whoever is obedient to the Lord Almighty. In other words, if the person is choosing another path, then they're not going to be capable of finding guidance. So this is actually really similar to the ayah that we were doing earlier, in where inna awhayna ilayk, very similar, in where the wahi that is here mentioned was more comprehensive than the wahi that was mentioned in the ayah that we were doing, in where it was regarding ma wasa bihi nuhan and وَمَا وَصَّيْنَا بِهِ إِبْرَاهِيم. So that one was more indicative of legislature. This is more comprehensive of the general decree or the general inspiration that was inspired onto the prophets. وَآتَيْنَا دَاوُودَ زَبُورًا. In other words, when we're looking at the different revelations, the different revelations can be in the, as you would find in the Quran, you would find in, of course, in the Torah, but it can also be in different practices that not necessarily as the revelation that we would have in the Quran. It could also be in giving direction. So similarly, when you're looking at a sunnah is actually considered a type of wahi. The sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ, and what he was doing, what he was reporting, the different descriptions, the different, of course, sayings, all of that is a form of wahi, where the Prophet ﷺ, it was given an inspiration, a direction, and certainly guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mention all of what he was teaching the Sahaba. Let's continue right there just to relate to what we were talking about. And he said, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ مِنَ الْعَرَبِ أَنْبِيَاءُ إِلَّا خَمْسَةً. And that there were only 5 Arab prophets: Hud, Salih, Ismail, Shu'aib, and Muhammad. So this is what he was saying right there, but it doesn't really matter to us whether they're Arab or not. But it's important to mention that when you're looking at the prophets that were mentioned many times, it is in close proximity to the place that was targeted at the time. In other words, within Mesopotamia, within the Arabian Peninsula, within the Middle East, and not necessarily Chinese prophets or probably prophets that were in Kazakhstan or whatever. It is simply because, number one, to let them know and be able to basically verify, to get the information. And since you would be telling somebody, remember, this is what happened to such and such, and basically it would make no sense for me to talk about someone and to tell it to them to take an example when, who are you talking about? I don't know. I don't even know what you're saying. That would not at all give al-maw'idha. Al-maw'idha would be of something that is within your reach, something that you know of, something that you have some knowledge about, in order for it to basically bring about the statement that was intended, which is al-maw'idha. So the only prophets that were Arab: Prophet Hud alayhi salam, Salih, Ismail, Shu'aib, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, one thing to mention, in where they were called, or it was told that they were Arab because they spoke Arabic. The other prophets did not speak Arabic. So Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, Ismail, Ishaq, Yaqub, all of these other prophets did not speak Arabic. So you could see that, I guess it's important to mention that the Quran did not necessarily just include the Arab prophets, but included all the other, at least a number of different other prophets, in order to say that the prophets had actually come, despite their different ancestry, they had come with the same exact message. The same exact message. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions here Prophet Nuh, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, as tashrifan lahum, as an honor to them. And of course, mentioned right there exactly like he said, Malaikati wa rusulihi wa Jibril wa Mikal. And it's not that there are only two angels. When he said wa Malaikati wa rusulihi wa Jibril wa Mikal, it's not that there are only two angels when he had mentioned Jibril and Mikal, but it is basically to show honor. Now, when you look at that, it's basically right there. He said, لا تقتضي الترتيب. In other words, right there in the general letter wa. So when you look at wa Isa, wa Ayub, it's not necessarily to show order, but it is basically to give such an addition. And certainly there was a particularization for Prophet Isa alayhi salam in the ayah to refute how the Yahud had denied the prophethood of Prophet Isa alayhi salam. All right. I'm just going to make the story short because, a lot of the scholars of tafsir can go in certain details and say, for example, Nuh, where does the name come from? Or Ibrahim. And many times it's important to mention that they didn't have, at least, I would say, the resources in knowing the languages, in knowing a lot of times the etymology, or sometimes even the resources translated as we have today. So we've got more resources today to understand some of the names and the backgrounds and archaeology and all of that to assist us. But still, of course, that does not give us enough information to go in certain details and knowing about all the prophets. I want to give an example in where it was really strange for me for Tahir ibn Ashur and why he actually made this mistake. And I would consider it a grave mistake on Tahir ibn Ashur with his great ilm, great ilm, one of the greatest scholars of all times, to be honest. But then he actually mentioned something rather really strange, and and he had mentioned that there were some prophets, let's see, wanted to bring about the tafsir, وَرُسُلًا قَدْ قَصَصْنَاهُمْ عَلَيْكَ, and some prophets that we had given and told you their story, and other prophets that we did not mention their story upon you. And وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا, and the Lord Almighty had talked to Musa directly. Taklima is basically right there in order to affirm the kalam. But he right there can't find it exactly, but what he was saying was that there was a prophet, ironically that he said that, and he said that there was a prophet during or at least before the Prophet ﷺ, right before the Prophet ﷺ, and he said that his name was Khalid ibn Sinan al-Absi, and he said that there was a hadith in regards to that, but then something was not right. So I was researching those ahadith, and those ahadith were actually not authentic. Those ahadith contained manakir. Manakir is not nail polish. Manakir is basically to contain a lot of narrators that are ambiguous, that are not known to us. So just wanted to mention this part of it, in where sometimes you can have some things in the books of tafsir. So not because it's written in a book of tafsir, it doesn't make it authentic. I guess just wanted to mention that piece of it. Not because it's mentioned in a book of tafsir, we don't necessarily contain it and take it as yes, it's mentioned in the book of Tafsir Ibn Kathir, therefore this is another Quran, even if it's a book of Tafsir. وَرُسُلًا قَدْ قَصَصْنَاهُمْ عَلَيْكَ. I think it would be fair to actually mention right there, let's go and see when it, in terms of il-qasas. I think when we're speaking about il-qasas, a couple things to mention here, and I think it's fair to mention one of the most important figures that went in beautiful writings, and I would say in that beautiful research in regards to al-qasas al-Qur'ani is none other but, of course, what the Western, I would say, misinformed researchers would think of what's his name, Sayyid Qutb, as being the dangerous figure because of his book. Because of a book that he had wrote. Now, one thing, التصوير الفني في القرآن, I think a very beautiful thing that he had written is التصوير الفني في القرآن, and even القصص في القرآن. And certainly when we speak about al-qissa fil Quran, the story in the Quran, I think it's important to mention when we're speaking about the stories in the Quran and what they really contain and what is actually meant in the story and what's really behind all these stories. So of course, certain stories in the Quran, certain stories were mentioned for certain prophets, not necessarily in details. But of course, when you're looking at the reason for the story and why the stories, I'm going to take you to al-Qasas fil Quran, just basically to take us to certain, wanted to, hold on, let me, actually prepared. Okay, oh, this is what I wanted to, okay, here we go. So no, that's not what I wanted you to. Okay, here we go. This is the website that I wanted you, and I wanted you to actually see the ayat because I don't like mentioning words and quotes without you seeing them, especially if you are a visual learner, you definitely need to see it. All right, so why are there even stories in the Quran? So the Quran speaks for itself. Why it mentioned these stories. Number one is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ ما كان حديثا يفترى ولكن تصديق الذي بين يديه وتفصيل كل شيء وهدى ورحمة لقوم يؤمنون. So the reason لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ, because there was a good example, something to learn from for those لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, for those that had deep ponderance in things, and they were not stories that were invented, stories that were made up. ولكن تصديق الذي بين يديه. What it is affirming what was revealed onto him, and it contained certain details and guidance and a mercy for those that believe. So in other words, it basically contained the different lessons of mannerisms, different lessons of patience, different lessons of being steadfast, different lessons of how the story continued from their time until our time today, in where the story of the message, the story of those that had opposed the message, the theme of the message. So we're looking at, when we say a story, there are characters, there's a theme, there's basically a crisis within the story, there's an ending to the story, and basically the opposition and all of those different stages in where things start out easy, then they would go harder, more complex, and then what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically had intervened in some of those stories. And let's see, وقال سبحانه وكلا نقص عليك من أنباء الرسل ما نثبت به فؤادك وجاءك في هذه الحق وموعظة وذكرى للمؤمنين. وَكُلًّا نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and we would mention the stories upon you, وَكُلًّا نَقُصُّ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ أَنْبَاءِ الرُّسُلِ مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. So what Allah, the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned the stories, and of course the stories of the different prophets, مَا نُثَبِّتُ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ, and want to look at this one right there, وَجَاءَكَ فِي هَذِهِ الْحَقِّ في هذه الحق وموعظة. Let's say ما نثبت به فؤادك, in other words, to keep your heart steadfast. In other words, for you to relate to what is happening to you as well. This is a similar story to what happened before you. So this is not new. This is not unprecedented, but other prophets went through similar opposition. So in other words, it is to basically give you the support, to direct you to continue with your patience, to continue giving you the inspiration to stay strong, to hold, to get the support, to basically be patient, to basically continue delivering the message despite the opposition and despite the harm. وَجَاءَكَ فِي هَذِهِ الْحَقُّ وَمَوْعِظَةٌ. I want you to look at this one, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed to you al-haq, to see through the stories themselves the inspiration of truth, and also al-maw'idha. What is al-maw'idha? Al-maw'idha is a good reminder. وذكرى للمؤمنين, and الموعظة وذكرى للمؤمنين is affirming الموعظة. ذكرى, it's to remind not only the prophets but also the believers themselves to take in from these stories. So the stories of the prophets, unfortunately today we could see many times we would relate with the stories of the prophets as if they were stories to be told to kids. But that's actually not true, and it's really dangerous to say, because the stories of the prophets were mentioned not for kids, but they were mentioned for the prophet himself, for the later, of course, dhikra lil mu'mineen, for a reminder to all the believers throughout history. And certainly, in order for us to go back to these stories, to remember the patience, to endure the patience, to learn how to get the inspiration from what they had done. So here we go, in where to take them as an example, to encourage us to do the deeds, of course, and certainly to continue maw'idha wa dhikra lil mu'mineen, to remember that. Now, when we're speaking about al-qissa fil Quran, the story in, or the stories in the Quran, we could see that the different types of stories in the Quran are, number one, you got certain stories of prophets, and basically talked about how they did the da'wah, basically calling them to direct them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and certainly mentioned the different miracles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala supported them with, and even the stance for those that had opposed them, and the stages of the da'wah, in where it started out to give da'wah, then there was an argument, then there was an opposition, then the other groups had taken a political military stance to completely eliminate such an opposition, and then of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be the one to bring about the true ending of how this conversation is ended, and where it is to mention that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned that it is truth that prevails and not falsehood. So whether it's the story of Prophet Nuh, Ibrahim, and other prophets, the same thing. The type 2 stories are basically to mention some different stories of different random cases, in where whether it was because the people that were living in Medina, in particular the Jews, had asked about certain cases, whether it's Ahl al-Kahf, or whether asked about Uzair, and or asked about Talut and Jalut, and those questions. So there were different stories of different random stories. Now, when we're speaking about random, this is not at all to say that this is to give some kind of a condescending, or at least to show that it is not of importance. But no, well, it would be important because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned it in the Quran. It would be something that we would have to take the inspiration from because it was mentioned in the Quran. But we're here talking about a series of how the stories are mentioned. So some series of stories are mentioned by prophets, others were different scenarios, different stories, whether it's the time of Talut and Jalut, or the children of Adam, or the story of Ahl al-Kahf, or even Dhul Qarnayn, or the story of Ashab al-Sabt, or Maryam, peace be upon her, of course, and Ashab al-Ukhdud and Ashab al-Fil. So those were different stories that were mentioned in the Quran and not necessarily related to the Prophet. So Ashab al-Fil, of course, we know also the story of al-Fil, the elephant in Surah al-Fil. It wasn't necessarily with a particular Prophet. And of course, let's say certain stories, this is type 3, in where it's mentioned certain stories during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So just as in Surah Al Imran went in detail with the Battle of Badr, went in detail in other surahs with the Battle of Uhud, and certainly with the Battle of Hunayn in Al Imran as well, in Tabuk in Surah Al-Tawbah, in Al-Ahzab, of course, in Surah Al-Ahzab, and spoke about Al-Hijrah, in where different surahs, Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, of course. And of course, when you're looking at the stories, they are pretty much within these parameters. And certainly the whole stories are, number one is that they were basically coming from al-Wahi, and number two, in where it basically was chosen out of all the different stories, they were basically chosen to giving the best ibra, the best example for us. So just wanted to mention these sides in regards to the stories, and let's continue right there. Oh, for the website, let me show you the website just to be fair. Let me show you. So the first one was actually Islam Web. Here we go, فوائد من ذكر قصص القرآن الكريم. And the second one was also Islam Web. Islam Web is actually a really good website to go to. Did mention that one before. And of course, even if you wanted to go to the translation, if you were to use Google Chrome, it basically would give you the option to translate all the article. Here we go. This is a translation for the whole article, making it easy for you to basically go back to it. Is the translation necessarily very accurate? We mentioned it was almost 75% accuracy, not necessarily completely accurate, but really worth to go to and find these articles. All right, let's continue right there. وَرُسُلًا قَدْ قَصَصْنَاهُمْ عَلَيْكَ. In certain prophets, we had mentioned القصص, قَصَصْنَاهُمْ. And when you look at the root, قَصَصَ, the word قَصَصَ in Lugha Arabiya actually means, and it comes from the root to cut. But of course, this is not to cut in English. The word to cut is basically to divide. But in Lugha Arabiya, the word قَصَصَ is to trace. So they're looking at it from the angle in where, yes, when you take the scissors to cut, you're actually tracing a certain spot to bring about, of course, whether it's the division or whether it's about tracing that matter. So when you look at قصصناهم, the word قصة is basically tracing the beginning, the events of the story, the different circumstances, the different events that happened in the story. And here, رُسُلًا قَدْ قَصَصْنَاهُمْ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ قَبْلِ, certain prophets that we had mentioned their story before, and other prophets we did not mention their story. And وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. So how did it actually jump from here to Musa again? Why wasn't Prophet Musa alayhi salam just mentioned in all these groups? So basically the Yahud objected at the time and actually said, well, why isn't Musa mentioned? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, if right there, we talked about these prophets having wahi because you had objected. يسألك أهل الكتاب أن تنزل عليهم, and where كتابا من السماء, they wanted a book from the heavens, and because they had objected, why would there be a revelation through an angel? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala objected to them. And then they basically wanted to say, well, what were the rest of the prophets? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered them and said, well, there are certain prophets, their stories were mentioned, and other stories and other prophets, their stories were not necessarily mentioned. And as for Prophet Musa alayhi salam, he spoke directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is what is called maf'ul mutlaq, to actually mean it was, number one, an affirmation. So when we say kallama taklima, shariba shurban, jalasa julusan, for example, this is called maf'ul mutlaq. It is one, to affirm the verb, to affirm what it was basically wanting to say in terms of the verb. So here, كلم الله موسى تكليما, that prophet Prophet Musa alayhi salam spoke directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, al-wahi has different forms. There's al-wahi through Jibreel alayhi salam. There's al-wahi where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke directly to Prophet Musa. There's al-wahi where prophets might actually get a ru'ya sadiqa, just like Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam also had a ru'ya sadiqa. Ru'ya sadiqa to mean a dream that they would be getting. Let's see, well, what about a zabur or a zubur? Look at that one, zubur or zabr, all right, or zabr right there, al-mazbur, all right. So in the end, basically,
can I ask you something really fast? Sorry.
Yep.
Okay, you know when Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam asked or he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show him how life and death, and then the four parts of the bird on the mountain. What was that?
So,
Sorry.
of course, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam was not in doubt. He wanted to, I guess, get the inspiration to really get.
I just wonder what kind of like.
Okay.
Can you explain that? Sorry, I wasn't saying he doubted, but like.
Okay.
Yeah, because you were talking about wahi and.
Okay, so that one is not necessarily relevant to this one, but that's all right. When we're speaking about wahi, we're speaking about how the message is given directly to the prophets. Okay, now Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, in the story that you had mentioned, he basically not doubted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and certainly because he basically asked that he wanted yaqeen, that he wanted certainty. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, did he really reveal himself? He didn't reveal himself, but he wanted to basically have him see the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, to gain certainty. And to get certainty is really to see the reflection of the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, well, I want you to take 4 different birds. I want you to slice them up, completely grind them, and put each and every single bird on a mountain. And then I want you to call them to come to you. When you look at that one, then basically he called them to come to him, and they came. They came walking, they came right there. In other words, for him to really have that certainty that such a power is basically the power of the Lord Almighty, in where the power to bring about the dead, even if they were sliced up, even if they were completely grinded, it is in the same way.
Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was speaking to him? Or was it a dream?
There are differences of opinions in that regards. We did go into the different details and what scholars had mentioned, whether it was speaking kifaha, whether it was speaking directly, or whether it was speaking through Jibreel alayhi salam. There
Oh,
are
okay.
differences of opinions. We did actually go in details with the story in the tafsir in Surah Al-Baqarah before. So that was what, almost 2 years ago. It
Oh,
is
okay.
recorded. Yep.
Uh,
So go to that one.
Okay. Jazakallah khair. Sorry,
Yep,
sorry.
وإياكم. That's all right. Now, the other thing is that speaking of questions, yesterday or at least the last lecture, there were some sisters that were confused. So, what about what is happening right now in Palestine? Are those Zionists or are those Jews? And how do we understand the hadith that spoke about all of this? If you're saying that Zionists are not necessarily Jews and the Jews are not necessarily Zionists, or and what is happening there. So therefore, we don't necessarily go against all Jews. How do we explain that? Now, one thing is that Zionism, all right, Zionism is, of course, we know whether it was Theodor Herzl, the Austrian journalist, and of course, we know that the call in uh, the Convention of Basel in 1897, we know that there was an agreement that was done in where to join and to make a certain national state for the Jews, and certainly the call was given a political, of course, a political agreement or given political agreements, whether it's with Lord Balfour or with UK, of course, or Great Britain at the time, and whether we're speaking about calling on to the Jews that were, of course, living in different parts of the world, or whether that was Hitler actually targeting not only Jews but others as well. But and of course, at the end, it was really used as this way in order to say, well, we need a place to protect us. We need a place, and certainly the ones to pay the price for Hitler's Holocaust, unfortunately, all right, who are really none other but the Palestinians, even though the ones that are supposed to be paying the price for, even if, I don't understand why many times Muslims are basically trying to uh, prove that the Holocaust didn't happen when they're not the ones that actually did it. They're not the ones that are behind it. But it's really strange how so many times we could just follow and think, well, yeah, the Jews are trying to say that they have the right to be in Palestine because they were targeted in the Holocaust and they faced all those atrocities during the Holocaust, and then therefore we need to find them a safe place. Well, it's like, you need to find them a safe place. Why are we the ones that are paying the price for somebody else's genocide, for someone else's attack? Why are we paying for it? And the ones that are supposed to be paying the price for it are none other but the Germans or even the West. They're the ones that are supposed to be giving them, I don't know, some kind of land, maybe give them a place in France or maybe give them a place in Germany, Frankfurt, whatever it is, and not necessarily go and find a Palestine as the option. But we know that there was a political reason to why Palestine was chosen. Now, Palestine, of course, it's really in the heart of five different corners that would basically be key corners in controlling, of course, the entrance to Africa and the entrance to Asia. And you've got whether it's Jabal Tariq or whether it's Bab al-Mandeb or whether it's Sinai or whether it's Gaza right there. So these five corners are key to controlling, of course, Africa and Asia as well. So, and at the same time, in order to control the Muslim world from getting the unity again and gaining power again in being the magnificent power in the world, because of course al-Khilafah al-Uthmaniyya had exceeded the limits from Austria. It was controlling all the way from Austria, and certainly you're going all the way to Kazakhstan, and those areas were actually under Uthmani power, and slash that is a Muslim power. So in order to bring about a dagger in the heart of the Ummah, certainly there was an agreement between a certain group of Jews to be in particular, of course, with Theodore Herzl, who suggested the idea, well, we can bring about the a Jewish unity by telling them to basically be the ones to act out what you desire for them to basically give you the support. We can have basically common interests in where we're trying to suppress the Muslim world. We're trying to get a Jewish nation. And at the same time, you basically want to leave the British mandate so we could work this out, worked it out basically, and had the birth of the Israeli country. And of course, with with the birth of Israel, of course, the ones, this is min bab التغليب. All right, so what does it taghlib mean? So certain times you can see certain stories in the Quran may mention, for example, the Yahud, but this does not necessarily mean every Jew would necessarily believe in that. So, for example, in the Quran, it mentions that Yahud, they said Uzair ibn Allah. That doesn't mean that all Jews would believe that Uzair is ibn Allah. And not all Christians would necessarily believe in certain things that were mentioned in the Quran in regards to Christianity, for example. So this is min babi taghlib. This is to speak about the majority. This is to speak about some Christians, or this is to respond to certain groups. And the same thing when we're speaking about certain hadith in where it mentioned the story of how the Yahud will come to control Palestine. And we already know that there are certain Jews, like the Tori Karta, for example, that oppose what is happening in Palestine and oppose Israel, the existence of Israel, and even what they're doing. But that at the end of the day was mentioning it min bab al-taghlib, from basically the common groups that would be supporting such state, which is Zionism, would basically be majority of them were actually Jews. So certainly you could see perhaps maybe in number you have almost 4 million. So 4 million Jews that are actually in what is right now called Israel in Palestine, of course. And you also have others that are in New York, you have others in different parts of the world, but you still see whether the Jews were Mizrahi or Ashkenaz or Sfaradi, that they're actually going to Palestine. They're going to Palestine. They are believing and taking this indoctrination that the Bible or the Torah had promised them the land in Palestine, and therefore this is what they're supposed to be heading for, and that they're supposed to be building their nation there and continuing, of course, the kingdom of Sulaiman or the kingdom of Dawood alayhi salam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had also mentioned the story of Prophet Dawood. أم كنتم شهداء إذ حضر يعقوب الموت قال لبنيه ما تعبدون من بعدي قالوا نعبد إلهك وإله آبائك إبراهيم وإسماعيل وإسحاق ويعقوب. And who? إله واحدة والأسباط إله واحدة ونحن له مسلمون. So at the end, it's basically to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Muslims. So even Prophet Dawood, even Prophet Sulaiman, even Prophet Musa alayhi salam, even Bani Israel al-Asbat themselves were actually worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Therefore, the legacy of those prophets was actually the legacy of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The legacy of those prophets was really the same with the prophets of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the prophets of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Nuh alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam. So all of them were actually considered carrying the same message, and that's why we basically would follow and recognize right there in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was bringing it to us. رُسُلًا قَدْ قَصَصْنَاهُمْ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَرُسُلًا لَمْ نَقْصُصْهُمْ عَلَيْكَ. Some of the stories were mentioned, others were not mentioned. And at the end, what was the story that they had been sent with? رُسُلًا مُبَشِّرِينَ وَمُنذِرِينَ. They would basically speak about al-bushra, bring in the glad tidings, and a warning. Now, that's as important when we want to make da'wah. It's important to always stay within those areas. Don't just speak about the dangers of hellfire, but speak about Jannah as well. Let that side, the side of bringing in a good reminder, bring in encouragement, and also bring in a warning. لِأَلَّا يَكُونَ لِلنَّاسِ عَلَى اللَّهِ حُجَّةٌ بَعْدَ الرُّسُلِ. So that way they would not have any evidence, or at least any objection to object onto the prophets and onto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that there was no revelation, and that they basically revealed that they basically had a revelation and revealed to the people the revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically sent on to the prophets. So to claim that there was nothing that they had received, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is refuting every single misconception, every single claim, and certainly in order to bring it clear to them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent in the revelation to them. Let's see, the real issue of Palestine. What is the real issue of Palestine? We just mentioned it. I hope I answered that. So the real issue of Palestine is, number one, there's a political side. One side is political, which is to gain control within the resources. Of course, gain control over the resources within the Middle East, whether we're speaking about the oil, or whether we're speaking about the gas that was discovered. In other words, different natural resources. So that's one side of it. Economical. The second side is political. And when we're looking at economical, of course, it's directly related to the political. And to gain, of course, political power within the Middle East is basically to make sure that you're suppressing any possibility of having any groups gain power in gaining power, of course, within the Middle East. And of course, that's why if you were to read in the different literature, to read in the different political report, etc., it always continues. And even in the 80s, it basically was anticipating and always, I would say, putting in fear that after the Cold War had ended, and of course the Russian communism, or the USSR communism ended, that what they would worry about is the rise of what they call the Green Peril, that is referring to Islam. The rise of the Muslim power, because we keep in mind the Muslim power did actually have not only political but also military. And certainly if you were to have the political and the military, that would actually mean the economical power as well. So what they were really worried about is this power of Muslim power coming in. So why would UAE, for example, support the West? What is up with them? Why support Israel? Why Ibn Salman actually supporting Israel as well, and supporting the West, etc. So these different figures, and Sisi, etc., they basically supported the West, because the West is basically in fearful that other religious groups, other Muslim groups might be creating, let's say, overcoming the powers that are right now controlling the Middle East, which really they are puppets in the hands of course, in the hands of the West in order to ensure Western hegemony over the different resources in the Middle East. So, of course, these puppets, whether it's Ibn Salman, whether it's Sisi, whether it's Ibn Zayed, the list goes on and on. All right. So they were basically in power in order to support the interest, the crusade interest, the Western interest, and certainly when you're looking at groups that are supporting such interests, it's because they're basically gaining the benefit. They're getting the benefit out of that. And what they worry about is that if certain Muslim groups were to overcome these figures, that would basically mean the reestablishment of political powers, economical powers, and certainly military powers to be at the hands of basically Muslims and at the hands of Sharia, all right, which would, of course, for the West, that would actually mean, and I think it's important right now to mention, I think the Western population or the Western populace, let's say it that way, is starting to recognize that these politicians are really not working in the favor for the Western
Allah
the
subhanahu wa
Western
ta'ala
citizen.
exposed them.
Exactly, exposing that these people are really working in favor of their own selves, of their own lies and their own pockets, and not necessarily in favor of the average citizen. And right now they're really being exposed, like never before, exposing the hypocrisy, exposing the lies that they're living, and the money and how it is basically coming in, and where they're engaging in these wars, but really it's not in favor and not necessarily in protecting the Western life, but it was really in protection of their own income coming in. So right now you could see all these different things that are exposing these politicians and their hypocrisy and their lies. But I think we still have to work more in revealing that. And it's really interesting, because when you look at some of the mufassirin, when they said حتى يكون الدين, for until the religion itself becomes lillah, in where people will want to actually adopt and would want a deen, a sharia itself, to be the ruling idea, the ruling at least legislature, and that's when it will happen, in where people will embrace not only Sharia but also embrace al-Aqidah itself and become Muslim. So it's subhanAllah, you could really see that the awareness and the awakening is actually happening. And to be honest, I think Gaza had really exposed a lot. Gaza had really exposed a lot of hypocrisy, Western hypocrisy, towards not only the people of Gaza, but Western hypocrisy towards even their own, the voices of their own people. It revealed and exposed their inhumane stances, how they're really bloodthirst, and exposed that they were really just after their own money and not necessarily the favor and the interest of the average citizen. So Allah al-Musta'an, I mean, at the end of the day, we have to, of course, continue and bring about the da'wah right there. رُسُلًا قَدْ قَصَصْنَاهُمْ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ قَبْلِ. So I hope I answered that one. So we're looking at, I guess, the question that was there, and where the real issue of Palestine, the real issue, yes, there is economical part, there's a military part, and there's definitely a deen part to it, because certainly they recognize that if the Muslims were to gain control over that area, that actually means gaining control over the resources resources, over the economy, and certainly that actually means over the power as well. You gain control over the money, you gain control over the political power, and you gain control over the money and political power. That's it. You basically got it all. And so Masjid al-Aqsa is under who's controlling the Masjid al-Aqsa? Well, if you right now, certainly the Muslims are at least they're entering Masjid al-Aqsa. But if we're talking about controlling al Masjid al-Aqsa to mean who comes in and who goes out, certainly Israel. Who goes in, who comes out at each and every single door. In fact, there is a police station right at the door of Al Masjid Al Aqsa or Qubbat Al Sakhra, right there, and they would be roaming around and coming in normally and all of that. So they technically the political power over Al Masjid Al Aqsa is basically under Israeli power, but not completely, because they do recognize right now that it holds a very, what is the word, that a place in where it itself, of course, an honorable place in the heart of the Muslims, and therefore they certainly fear that if they might actually listen to the conservative, in particular the Haredim, and their choice of demolishing Al Masjid Al Aqsa and building the temple, subhanallah, even though the religious groups they don't even participate in the army, and yet they're myopic in their very narrow down vision of how they want to support their religion is so is extremely stupid. In where, in Palestine we say "Dabbur zan ala kharab usho," which basically means when you look at, it's not the bee, what is that? It's not the bumblebee, the wasp. When the wasp would basically go around its own nest and then bring and direct and attract attention to its own nest, and then people would basically come to it and basically smash it and bring an end to it. And that's exactly what's happening. So the religious extremist Jews, they're extremely stupid. Even if they wanted to continue living in Israel or in Palestine, of course, but even if they want to continue living in the state that they had actually made Israel, to right now expedite the demolishing of Al Masjid Al Aqsa is really going to attract nothing but more animosity, but more unity within the Muslim Ummah to go against them. But subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will يجعل تدبيرهم في تدميرهم. He will make their tadbir, their plans, actually be directed at their tadmir. So what it really brings is like they're planning and they're laying out these agendas, but these agendas are really coming at and against them. And they would think that it's to expedite a Jewish nation, to expedite the Jewish power, but in reality, what it's really doing is expediting their ending. So this is, if we're talking about who's controlling it, in reality, it's really Israel, although yes, they don't fully control it, but at the same time, putting this political side on a side, well, why don't they fully control it? Why would they want to demolish it? Because they basically want to end any Muslim existence, any Muslim resemblance over Al Masjid Al Aqsa or over Palestine or over anywhere. And certainly it's keeping in mind that they don't necessarily, and we talked about the Agorot before, talked about the expansion that they're really seeking is not necessarily just at Palestine, but no, they actually want to go farther than that. We did mention that one, so I'll just stick right now to stick right now to at least the ayah right there. وَرُسُلًا قَدْ قَصَصْنَاهُمْ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ قَبْلِ. رُسُلًا قَدْ قَصَصْنَاهُمْ عَلَيْكَ مِنْ قَبْلِ, meaning told you about them while you were in Mecca. So we told you some of the stories in Mecca and certain stories that we did not tell you their story. And كلم الله موسى تكليما. And of course, this is for التأكيد, to affirm and confirm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had spoken to Prophet Musa alayhi salam directly. So let's see, and was it that Musa alayhi salam just heard him? He said, بل هو الكلام الحقيقي الذي يكون به المتكلم متكلما. So here we go. He said it's actually the actual words in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala literally talked to him directly and not metaphorically, but it is right there. وجب أن يكون كلاما على الحقيقة من الكلام الذي يعقل. And where تكلم تكلمة, and where it's basically literally, and where it's basically what we would understand, in where certainly he heard his words, he heard, and he basically talked to him directly. It was not a metaphorical thing in where, well, what did they actually come with? مبشرين ومنذرين, in order to bring about a complete statement that is basically clear to all. And of course, there are certain scholars. What are the number of the different prophets? ألف ألف 400 ألف 24 ألفا. So basically, is it 24,000? Is it 124,000? And of course, let's say بعثت على أثر 8,000 من الأنبياء منهم 4,000 من بني إسرائيل. That the Prophet ﷺ was sent onto 8,000 prophets, 4 of them from Bani Israel. So how do we understand that they were 124,000? Let's see. The Prophet ﷺ also said, let's look at those ahadith for a bit. So we've got the first one, number 2. Well, that's not a hadith, but it's more of a report right there, athar. And let's see, and where number 3, let's look at أورده كعب ومقاتل أبو ليث في تفسيره. So the part about Muqatil, which is that they were 124,000, was basically mentioned in this resource. Let's see, for the other hadith, let's see, in where it said that there were 8,000 prophets, 4 of them were from Bani Israel. Right here, he said in Majma' al-Zawaid al-Haythami had mentioned that there is a narrator, Musa ibn Ubayd al-Rabdi, and he said he is extremely weak. So in other words, that narration does not stand as strong in the first place. Let's look at this hadith. Abu Dharr al-Ghifari قال قلت يا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كم كانت الأنبياء وكم كان المرسلون؟ قال كانت الأنبياء 100,000 نبي و24,000 نبي وكان المرسلون 313. Let's see, for number 5, tafsir al-Layth basically didn't really, let's see, صحيح ابن حبان من حديث طويل. And let's see, Ibn al-Jawzi في الموضوعات, he basically had accused Ibrahim ibn Hisham. So basically the hadith, even that one doesn't really stand as strong as well. In where the hadith, what does it say? How many of the prophets were there? He said 124,000 and 300, 300, what is that? 300, hold on, 300. So 313 prophets were mursaleen. All right, so this is right there, not really standing up to be authentic as well. قلت هذا أصح ما روي في ذلك. القرطبي says that this was actually the most authentic. In where mentioning 124,000, he said أصح ما روي في ذلك. Let's say, but الآجري Abu Hatim al-Busti في المسند والصحيح له, so basically wanted to mention that the narration of Ibn Hibban was not necessarily completely authentic, but there are supporting narrations. So this is what al-Qurtubi wanted to say. That the number of the different prophets, that the best resources, the most valid resources, that they were 124,000. So what we'll do, we'll end right here, inshallah. And we left off at this ayah, وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَزِيزًا حَكِيمًا. And inshallah, we'll continue, inshallah, tomorrow with لكن الله يشهد بما أنزل إليك أنزله بعلمه والملائكة يشهدون وكفى بالله شهيدا. Any questions before we sign off, inshallah?
Wow, we covered a lot today, mashallah.
We sure did. A lot. Yeah. And I forgot to actually mention القصص في القرآن and Sayyid Qutb, but inshallah maybe some other time. And this is it. So inshallah we'll continue.
I think there was one question in the
Okay, let's see. Muslims are being oppressed in many parts of the world, but why don't we talk about them or support them? You mean support the Muslims? Why don't we talk or support them? So, oh dear, if the world was as easy as like that. All right. So unfortunately, many Muslims are totally lacking awareness. So Muslims are not aware of their own Islam. The Muslims are right now still living there, even though the enemy is at their throats, choking them. But you could say Muslims are even divided. And you could say that you would have racism within the Muslim Ummah. So how are you going to bring about a unity when they're still living their Jahiliyyah? You're seeing the Jahiliyyah in where they don't even know their Islam. You're seeing the Jahiliyyah where the Muslims are adopting the Western legislature, adopting the Western culture, adopting the Western vision in regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in regards to life, in regards to the definitions of human rights, in regards to definition of family, in regards to definition of human, in regards to each and every single corner. And so we're, although we've got the money, although we have a lot of experts in all the fields, but unfortunately, we're still really divided even within our own selves. So why are we oppressed? Well, we're oppressed because we're divided. And this is the reality of the world. The reality of the world is that when you're divided, you become an easy target to those lone wolves. They'll come at you and they'll basically, the Prophet ﷺ actually said, يُوشَكُ الْأُمَمْ أَن تَدَاعَ عَلَيْكُمْ كَمَا تَدَاعَ الْأَكَلَةُ إِلَى قَصْعَتِهَا. Then he said, one of the Sahaba actually said, أَوَمِنْ قِلَّةٍ نَحْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ قَالَ بَلْ أَنْتُمْ كَثِيرٌ وَلَكِنَّكُمْ غُثَاءً كَغُثَاءِ السَّيْلِ. And you look at this hadith and where the Prophet ﷺ was mentioning that there's going to come a time where all those different enemies, or at least the whole world, would unite against the ummah, in where they would basically snatch as if they were snatching from a meal. And the Prophet ﷺ mentions the reason, and it wasn't a lack of numbers, it wasn't somehow lack of numbers of Muslims, but it was min qulubi, and what happened, and where the mahaba, the honor, the respect, because the Muslims themselves, they're not holding on to their Quran, they're not holding on to their Islam, and they don't even recognize that the reason why they're being targeted is really because of their Islam. They're focusing on just political and economical, not really recognizing that one of the main reasons, in fact, the main reason is really in order to dismantle the whole idea of Islam in order to gain power and to control the Muslim Ummah. And that's, this, if you were to go, I think one of the most important books is really easy to find. It doesn't need any expert. All you need to do, go to Civil Democratic Islam, and this lady actually did the job for you. Civil Democratic Islam. Here we go. And Cheryl Bernard. And the book is right there. The book is available. I don't need to actually give it to you. The book is available. You can download it PDF right there. See, doesn't need any rocket science. You can, and it's not hidden. And she will give you all the details of how they had an agenda to disempower the Muslims from holding on to their Islam. And she'll go in details and, well, yeah, we need to make sure that we would replace the Quran with poetry of the past, and we would replace those that would be speaking on Islam, and we
Does
would
it talk about
basically
the Arabic language
Oh,
too?
it talks about the Arabic language. It talks about the culture. It talks about the schools. It talks about the curriculum. It talks, oh, she basically laid out, and it was really the agenda that was suggested on how to basically empty the Muslim world of their Islam. Literally, how to empty the Muslim world of their Islam, because Islam would be the only thing that would stand in opposition with, of course, their hegemony. Right there, it's not rocket science. It's actually available. So, but basically mention that one. And it's really important to see that, and where they would have the agenda instead of the Quran, actually have them read at least in other languages, instead of the Islamic history, let them learn about Western history, or at least Jahiliyyah times. In other words, you're amplifying the voices of Jahiliyyah, amplifying the voices, and literally subsidizing those that are speaking against Islam, subsidizing them, whether giving them the tools, and certainly giving them the money, and certainly giving them this appearance that they're the people that are intelligent, they're the people that are really smart. And of course, you will find the masses, and certainly you will find many that will not recognize that there is an agenda being directed at them, and that there is an agenda that they're being indoctrinated with, and they would think they have it all. So this is important to keep in mind, in where what is really happening. Let me see what is really happening, and why are we oppressed? Well, we're not even recognizing that our own deen is being targeted. We just we take each and every single story as divided. We'll talk about Pakistan like it's just an issue of Pakistanis, with Kashmir and India, and not related to, no, that there is a bigger picture. We'll talk about, for example, Al-Quds, and we'll talk about that as if it's just a little thing right there, some little story. And we'll talk about probably Syria as a little story right there, or we'll talk about the Kurds. Oh, it's just a little story. No, it's not a little story. It's
Oh, you
all
mean
one
like the
story.
different nations and the
Oh,
different
absolutely. It's
cities
really one
and
story. It's really one story. It's to
subhanAllah.
divide the ummah. It's to divide the ummah, because at one point, the unity
Oh,
of
that's grand. You know, I tried to find this book,
oh, it's
the
really easy to
information of, and I'm glad that you put it there.
It's
Jazakallah
right
khair.
there. It's so easy to find. It's so easy to find. And you will find a lot of books. This really exposed a lot. Just go in it and literally say who the enemies are. And she'll say, well, they're the fundamentalists, the ones that would say they need to go back to the Quran, and they need to go back to the Sunnah, and this is what they would be looking like. And in other words, what they really regarded as the enemy is not necessarily the person that is somehow a combatant or somehow carrying arms. No, they're actually right there in the book, actually targeting people embracing certain ideas. It has nothing to do with combat. It has nothing to do with any military stuff. So she's basically dividing and considering, and you might say, well, why are we even concerned about some Western lady that mentioned this, American lady that mentioned this? Well, no, this was This was, yes, in particular during the Bush administration in particular, but it's still, when you're looking at RAND, that think tank is still really working as of course, a think tank that is presenting itself, that it is a place of resources, a place of studies, a place of research, but in reality, it's not a place of research and objective research. In reality, it is actually bringing in such agendas, really, in order to replace or place or even define certain things. So when you look at this book, it's not some random person, but no, these right now are considered one of the think tanks. So it's one of the think tanks, but it's not the only think tank. But you would say, sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make certain kuffar actually say certain words right directly and overtly, and where you don't really need to bring about any explanation. It's right there. Let's say it's verbatim actually said right there, in bringing about a clear demonstration, making it easy for those that want to show that there is an agenda. There is definitely an agenda that is really going far into dismantling Islam within the Muslims. So this is just this is actually part of it. Definitely to basically remove Islam, put instead of it jahiliyyah, ghafla, division. These are the three main reasons, absolutely. And that's exactly what this book just does. And just, you really need to go to that book. You really, really need to go to that book.
I'm definitely going to read that book.
Really, I actually did my master's dissertation. I would say maybe almost maybe 75 pages were just on this book. Just on this book.
Is your dissertation published yet?
It is published, but in Arabic, not in English, but it is published. And
okay. Inshallah, one day it will be in English.
Inshallah. It's really easy right now to translate it, but alhamdulillah, right now, inshallah, we can probably have the time to do so, inshallah. But you really got to go to that book right now. Just, once we end, just go to that book and just read it. And just read it. And you're like,
yeah, because in order to go against, the forces of the enemies, you have to know their tactics.
You don't
be aware. I mean,
I don't want to use it in that lexicon, Noura, to say I want to go against the forces of the enemies, to use it in a military lexicon. That's not what I actually want to say.
I'm saying like, no, not like that. I mean, like strategically, with thought, with ourselves, with our families, with our communities.
What I want to say, I don't want to, right there, attract any any of these people to actually come at me and see and start using me and using my words and misquoting them in order to benefit their agenda. But I would say it's important to expose their own terrorist agenda. Okay, that's what I would want to say. It's important to expose their terrorist agenda in where they're not as what they want to claim to be, in where they would claim that they're civil, they would claim that they are democratic, and certainly that's not necessarily what they really are. They are imposing their ideas. They're actually putting in certain agendas to impose their ideas. So that's really right there, and using power, using military force in order to impose their ideas. So what they are claiming to be after is really right exactly what they are doing. That's what I want to say. They're claiming to run after terrorist groups, but in reality, they are the ones that are really making these agendas in order to bring about really an uncivil and certainly undemocratic, being certainly a terrorist agenda. Let's say it that way. That's the least that we could say. And I think it's important to go and really read it in order to recognize what is happening to the Muslim world, who's actually playing a certain dirty game in the back scenes, and recognize, when in Arabic, of course, إذا عرف السبب بطل العجب. If we would know the reason why a lot of the games are actually played all around us, then you would basically take away the astonishment. It's like, what is happening? Why is this happening this way? Well, once you recognize who's moving all these different lines and these different strings of the puppets, then you'll recognize and you'll know that the puppet is not moving on its own. It's someone else is actually playing the game and actually doing all of that in the back end. So it's definitely important
That's another reason to learn our Islam too. Subhanallah.
Absolutely. Subhanallah.
Because they want to strip it away from us.
You will see. Oh my God, you will have a jaw drop reading that book and wonders like, how on earth did we how on earth did the Muslims not expose the dirty works of such groups, in where she would literally say, well, here's how we can basically redirect the Muslims' Islam from having their focus on the text, the Quran, the Sunnah, and we would do 1, 2, 3, and where we're going to be paying for the artists or so-called stars, celebrities. We're basically going to pressure the government to reduce the number of Quranic classes and the number of Islamic studies classes, and we're going to ask them to replace it with English language or foreign languages, or we're going to, instead of learning Quran, we're going to ask them to reduce the number of Quran classes, and we're going to look into those curricula, that curriculum, and ask them to put certain ayat as a replacement. And we're going to basically ask them and research the number of people and how and what is basically what is applied in schools and colleges, and we're going to pressure the governments. You'll see, this is really sad to say, but you have more of that agenda actually applied in the Muslim world than actually the West. So it's a lot easier to practice your Islam in America, believe it or not, than practice it in Egypt itself. In certain ways, at least I will call it in certain legal ways. Because you will see that Al-Azhar itself actually issued a statement that niqab is actually not part of Islam. But they would not issue such a statement in the West because it basically goes against the Constitution, to have people have their religious choices actually respected. So you will see that in terms of law, they will work towards, of course, they will work towards making it harder for Muslims to practice their Islam in the Muslim world, because they can have their agenda played out over there, enforce and exactly. Put political pressure on Muslim countries to not necessarily be democratic and be, in that way. And versus in America, I mean, I worked at a Catholic university with my niqab, but never whatsoever was I told that I wasn't invited or I was not respected. In contrast, to be honest, I was extremely, I would say, respected on St. Catherine University's campus. To be honest, even when I spoke against the LGBT, even when I said that's not what the religion teaches, even when I actually spoke my mind, I had the provost herself invite me to her office and actually tell me, you have the space. speak what you think is necessary. Versus I've had friends that I know personally in Al-Azhar, in Egypt, in Syria, that they didn't even have their space to wear their niqab in a Muslim country, believe it or not.
Forget that. They would follow people who pray and go to the masjid too much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, the other day I was sitting with this Egyptian girl, and she told me that one of the professors in Al-Azhar held held the niqab, you know, kind of like touched it in a very the other girl's niqab, and actually said, "You're probably too ugly. That's why you're probably wearing it." This is a professor talking to a Muslim student on where? On Al-Azhar campus. Who gave them this space?
Ya Allah.
Wallahi al-Azim, can you imagine if this was actually done on an American campus or on a Western campus? You would definitely guarantee that this would really be called out. But who is supporting such groups, those liberal groups in the Muslim world and against our own culture, against our own religion? It's really these types of people, the civil democratic Islam, those that would want to claim that they're
so they're located here,
absolutely,
right? SubhanAllah.
Exactly. But they don't want, they certainly can't do it in their own country, like in America, because the Constitution would expose them. There's definitely better democracy where it's applied there. And that's why they even refused to call the coup that happened against, of course, a democratically elected president like Mursi. They even refused to call it a coup. Why? Because it wasn't basically going with their interests. It's I think it's important just to keep that in mind. I mean, but definitely let's say the more awareness we have, whether it's on a political side or whether in our Islam, we would have a lot of these question marks really, I guess, just flip from being question marks to lights. It's like, oh, now I got it. And once you see all of that, trust me, you'll be able to understand your Quran, and you'll be able to understand the munafiqeen, and you'll be able to understand the mushrikeen, and really, wow, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposed them in the Quran. So although we might say, well, this is supposed to be a class of tafsir. Well, this is a class of tafsir, but of course, part of the class of tafsir is really understanding the tafsir of our reality today. How is it related? Because you can't separate.
Allahu Akbar.
You can't separate it. It's really the same story, but different players. Same story, the exact same story, but different players. So I hope I guess I'll stop right here, inshallah, and we'll continue. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. So inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. And Rabbi yahfadhku. And sorry if I kind of went off topic a little bit. But
it was needed. It was needed at the end. You know, subhanallah.
الله المستعان. And ربي يحفظكم جميعا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
جزاك الله خيرا.